Welcome to The Difference Engine, the show for tech founders, investors, and innovators.
Okay, this time we're talking about the problems of succession. No, not the telly program, succession in tech. Should you go for the insider or the outsider approach?
And everybody's talking about the AI bubble. So here's 3 reasons why we think it ain't going to burst anytime soon. So the next tech crash, is it going to be soon? Will it be the biggest? Well, isn't it about time we maybe called out some of the doomsterism which is appearing at the moment, don't you think, Paul?
I don't know. I mean, this big tech crash everyone's talking about looks like it could be imminent, actually.
You know, we need to put this in some sort of perspective. I mean,
Sure.
human societies seem to have accepted that the march of IT is somehow inevitable. And, that's been continuing since the First World War with a few blips. We've seen IT move into our lives from, office and factory automation to gaming and mobility and so on. And we've seen relentless category creation going on in this. But, are we now actually reaching something different? A sort of tipping point where, real numbers and societal acceptance or not of AI and the data centers that drives it, are actually accelerating an inevitable, classic black tulip mania crash driven by, what I would see as an over-exuberant supply of capital into what is actually a very resource-restricted space. And is someone going to cry Emperor's New Clothes and some form of rational reality dawn, and as this sort of irrational hope evaporates?
Oh, yeah, I think so. Well, I think the guy who's going to call Emperor's New Clothes is out there. Good old Ed Zitron. Ed and I spoken a while back. And of course, back in the days when Ed and I were speaking to each other, he was a PR man. In fact, if I recall, it was Easy PR. But Ed Zitron has now reinvented himself as a commentator, a researcher, no less. And he's talking about a lot of founder cycle type stuff, like end of an era. I thought we'd look at 3 sort of on the surface level unconnected but connected I believe moves here. The fact that data center bills are being stalled in the US, and you're the man of you're the eco guy, so you'll know why that's all to do with power outages, etc. It's also talked about the Chinese who are now threatening to withdraw their AI models, like take their toys home, just when we all got used to them, bit harsh. And then, meanwhile, over here in good old EU, where they say we legislate, don't innovate, we've got the EU issuing massive fines to Google and Apple Apple's saying, right, if you're going to do that, we'll withdraw our tech from Europe. So this feels a bit like top of the bubble. Is it, or can we hold on?
Something I heard the other day from some very, very well-informed consultants was that the financial picture for OpenAI and Anthropic is now so weak, actually, they should not even be allowed to IPO.
Yeah, right? I hear that a lot. Yeah, Ed's also argue, this is God bless him, he's got a turn of phrase here. Speaking of generative AI, his quote is, "There's not really a business there." Wow.
That's pretty short.
That's going to come as a bit of a shock for some people.
Yeah, but it said some pretty sharp things. I mean, for instance, that companies encourage waste because they charge for usage rather than outcomes, right? In this day and age.
Yeah, tokenomics, baby.
Yeah, they haven't changed the basic model. They've applied a completely different technology to a very different model. Yeah, it's sort of like broadband versus dial-up. That went really well, didn't it? So it's also been pretty tough about AI agents and Dash co-workers.
Oh, we love those guys. They're brilliant people.
But, didn't he say they want everybody else to do the innovation for them and spend as much time as they can on tokens? That doesn't sound to me like a very productive idea.
What he's saying there is that it serves the interests of LLM folks to hype up AI agents and co-workers, and we'll all have hundreds of them. Why? Because they burn tokens, and what do they sell? They sell tokens. So he's pretty neg on the whole thing. This is bubbly stuff, I would say.
Yeah, but he said something I thought was stunning, but also the bleeding obvious, because we've seen it over and over again. Is that big tech and venture capital is investing in AI because it's run out of other growth stories. And frankly, through its own actions, it's reduced the value of many of its investments in SaaS companies. They've basically run out of hypergrowth ideas. So this is the new hypergrowth idea. And something else he's warned about, which is very real world to my mind, is that infrastructure build out could really turn into a financial problem if capex and debt keep rising. Yeah. So there is a danger that data center debt stops being issued. And, when that happens, it's bye-bye industry, right?
Yeah. It's like musical chairs, right? When the music stops, you got to sit down.
That data center build slowing or be delayed is probably the most important issue in all of this, right? So an investment boom has to assume things. And in this case, it's assuming that, tens or hundreds of gigawatts of new power and data center capacity will come online in the next few years. Nobody knows. But if you think about it, there are some genuine bottlenecks in that, right? So you've got the delays from utility interconnection, you've got shortage of transformers, you've got gas turbine supply constraints, and frankly, you shouldn't be using gas turbines to power these things. You've got power transmission build out, which, often can't even service the basic houses in California that it was supposed to be serving. You've got the whole issue of planning permission. No matter how fast you drive that through, we're seeing more and more local and political opposition to data center build and indeed AI take up. And there's just a massive environmental acceptability issue about this. And what we have seen, are the likes of Google and Microsoft completely breaking their commitments to carbon reduction at a stroke with these investments. So, if those constraints persist, then one half of the investment equation ceases to work. AI revenue could arrive more slowly than investors expect, right? However, there's a weird economic quirk in all of this, which is...
Not the Jevons paradox again.
I'm not sure if this is Jevons, but it might be. You tell me if you think this is Jevons. So delayed projects don't necessarily mean cancelled demand. So companies like hyperscalers have enormous capital budgets and just increasingly build wherever power is available. So out they go and generate their own power. The problem, as I said before, that could be gas turbines, which is not a good idea.
Well, that could be Jevons paradox. We just don't know yet. The jury's out, which is why it's so much fun speculating. But what we do know, real and present, is power is a strategic constraint already.
Oh God, yeah. We've seen some amazing headlines on that. If anybody has not been listening, haven't The Economist and Reuters and Fortune been going on about that?
Yeah. So The Economist says, will the data center backlash derail the AI boom? Sort of what you were just saying, talking about how the American tech giants, and they're focusing on America here, but of course we've got similar issues here in Europe. The Germans switched off their nuclear. That was clever because you could always rely on Mr. Putin to help you out. We've got a terrible national grid here in the UK, and having just come back from France, they are quite ensconced in nuclear, but that has its own issues. But the American tech giants in particular, according to The Economist, are going to face lots of local opposition, are facing lots of local opposition to data centers. And the newspaper said that the backlash has made it difficult to find places to build them. Ouch, that's going to slow things down.
This is a problem when the grid operators themselves, in whose interest it is to look like they're in control of the thing, are already saying that the demand for electricity to power AI and manufacturing actually is rising much faster than historical trends. So what they mean by that is they've got no idea how they're going to meet the demand based on what they know from the past. So I think that this creates really three possibilities. So AI growth slows simply because electricity isn't available. Massive investment could flow into generation, transmission and storage. Problem with that is it's not nearly as sexy as AI. And will the capital follow? Or, and this is probably what will happen, is both happen simultaneously in different regions at different speeds. So it's a big mishmash. However, if I was going to be positive about this, the idea of power shortages coming up with this key enabling technology might actually increase spending on infrastructure. or infrastructure companies, so spending on infrastructure, investment in infrastructure companies across the world, which of course has a quite a nice spin-off, which just increases national security, but it will slow returns for AI infrastructure users. So, bit of a dance with the devil there.
That's possibly the first time you've given financial guidance or advice and share tips.
No, it is not financial advice. It is not share tips. It is absolutely not. It's an opinion.
Let's put it this way. There may be a return in infrastructure companies, possibly.
What about the Chinese, though, man?
Well, you can't invest in the Chinese. It's very hard, very hard. But the Chinese AI companies are now saying, you can't use our stuff.
This is definitely more geopolitical than fundamental, but nonetheless, it is a real threat.
The Chinese are saying, we might withdraw our LLM models, which, let's face it, are a tenth or less of the cost of the US models. And a lot of folks are relying on them. And if you are somewhat sophisticated as a user, you can choose the model which you deploy your generative AI agent on. So, economics being economics, the Chinese generally open source models below that are booming. And now the Chinese are saying, we might switch them off.
Yeah, right. But, if they do, here's the positive. I've been trying to think about a positive for this, and it may actually, and I'm not sure if this is the positive, but it may have the effect of strengthening US model providers, providing they don't bend to the whims of Dementia Donny, because that is another massive spanner that could be thrown into the AI works. This stuff is disruptive, but I don't think it's massively to worry about.
Well, I don't know. I mean, talking about the geopolitical side of this, Chinese takeaway, forgive the pun, is that Anthropic is now making eyes at the US government and saying, we will give you, not offer you to buy, give you 5%. Then you've got a lot of alignment between the owners of that 5% capital, i.e. the US government, and the people they're competing with in the market, many of whom are Chinese. So,
sorry, what's it? Government ownership of the commanding heights of the economy? Have they gone communist or something? What are they thinking?
So ironic.
They're sliding into socialism. What will President Trump think about that?
I don't know. So what do you think? What do you think about this Chinese takeaway? Then, if they do take it away, it'll reduce competition for sure. What else do you see?
It could strengthen innovation in the rest of the world. I think this is just a balancing act. I'm actually not really too worried about it in terms of its impact on the industry. It's just another geopolitical complexity there.
This sort of backs up Ed's point, doesn't it? And you've just said the same thing. You said you're not too worried about it. So if AI is not as important as we are led to believe, and there isn't really a model in generative AI as Ed purports, then maybe it's not something to worry about, and maybe we should look closer to home with the EU.
Of course, AI is important, but the ultimate impact of AI won't be from large language models. It'll be from its selective application right through the economy. And we see the whole AI through the application of LLMs at the moment, and that is not where the real value will actually happen. And as we've said, it's the actual application of AI where the Europeans may have a trump, pun intended, card.
So the EU fining again. It's all fine in the EU. What is it with everybody getting antsy and throwing their toys out the pram? Apple has changed its App Store policy because it doesn't want to be fined even more by the EU. What the bloody hell?
Well, that's clearly the EU policy actually having an impact. Let's be clear about this. Apple wants to look tough at home. So throwing its toys out of the pram is frankly the current American way of dealing with things, it appears. It'd be easy to say that Europe is becoming a more difficult regulatory environment for big tech. My argument would be it's all it is a counterforce to their hegemony. And, in a proper capitalist market economy, that actually has to be a good thing. Otherwise, we're faced with monopoly and taking what we're given.
I mean, I think that's a bit of a broad brush. Some of the GDPR, obviously, we like that. But some of the other moves that are being legislated may lead us to everybody having a mandated ID. I think that is the issue, the free speech issue that the big US big tech's hanging its hat on, to get the moral high ground here. And if they do that, then we'll have Europe where everybody's tracked phenomenally, and the US, arguably, although I don't know the reality of this, a little less so. So it's becoming an existential sort of fight, not just about the 500 million euros here, 700 million euros there. It's funny how the same fine in the Wall Street Journal is 500. In the BBC, they've upped it to 700. And it's strange what adversity makes strange bedfellows. You've got both Apple and Meta attacking the EU now. It's really spicing up. And this is the sort of stuff I think that sort of exemplifies a bubble. So are these three pointers of a bubble? We've got power issues. We've got the Chinese declining to serve the rest of the world their amazing technology. We've got the EU legislating like crazy. Are these enough to agree with Ed and say AI ain't really a business? Generative AI isn't really an industry.
Well, allow me to try and segment this and think about what would be a bearish case in that or a bullish case. So my argument for the bearish case would be, from an economic point of view, AI has become highly concentrated. And that means some of the largest companies are priced in a very particular way. It is expected that they will sustain 20, 40 or more % revenue growth. And on their numbers, those are very big numbers. So there is enormous AI monetization at the moment. So a very small group of people are making an enormous amount of money. There is continuous hyperscaler capex because these companies do have the money to invest. And there is plentiful pricing, financing, and that goes on. And let's assume there's enough electricity to power this. But if even one of those 5 things weakens, I think the multiples could compress sharply. And when that starts to happen, it's downward. And again, if we go back in a history lesson, major technology booms often hit physical or demand bottlenecks before the financial ones. There's a lag. It's sort of emperor's new clothes. It's obvious something's going on, but the financial markets don't want to admit it and carry on and carry on and carry on until they're forced to correct.
That's super interesting. Let me try and make the opposite case to that.
Go bully.
Go bully. So yeah. I'm sorry, Ed, with greatest respect. Let's look at the folks that are generating this cash flow. They are themselves cash cows. Microsoft. It may have got a lot of people at Xbox, but it's making a ton of money from its old, and I mean like 40-year-old product suite that's clouded. Amazon, the Everything Store, now the Everything Cloud. Alphabet, Google, still the world's largest advertising company, and Meta does horrible things with your data, but makes a fine business doing it. So these guys are largely funding their AI stuff, and I say largely, inverted comments, from operating cash flow. They've got cash machines in the middle, and that's a big difference. The
big difference is from the dot-com boom, where the same thing was happening, but it was happening on other people's savings. So, this is a classic maturing of the market. There is, an internal cash machine going on. It's still not enough to feel what's going on, but it's different.
But we're missing a third possibility. We're in a bubble. We're not in a bubble. We're in a bubble whether we like it or not, and things just continue as normal. Could that happen?
Some examples that would say that it can for the near future. So the late 1990s internet boom went on for way longer than it was obvious that the real world numbers just weren't there. Massive discontinuities between the availability of applications and people's ability to access those applications.
Is it Wile E. Coyote that goes over the edge of the cliff and his legs are still going till he looks down?
I also think you could argue that the US housing bubble before about 2008, it was obvious that the whole thing was being built on, mud and shifting sand, and also the Japanese equities market in the late 1980s also went on for way longer than the fundamentals should have supported. So the warning signs appeared years before the ultimate peak.
All right, so let's pull this together. What would, in fact, convince two old skeptics like us that we are nearing the peak, that Ed's right, that it's all over, this is bubble and the pop's coming in? Cash your savings, cash your investments, cash your pensions, and get out. What would you look for that to happen?
Oh, right. Okay. You could put me on the spot now. So first thing I think is have a look at the hyperscalers. Are they actually cutting AI capital expenditure, CapEx, rather than just delaying projects? I'm sure we'll see a bit of delaying projects going on. My view would be that, Microsoft, and you just referred to this, recent downsizing of its gaming business would tell us that this is not yet happening.
Well, to counter that, though, there's a lot of people, Meta's just started selling excess AI capacity. If there's such demand, why are they selling it?
Yeah, well, that sort of links to what I think would be my second indicator, would be that cloud AI utilization is actually falling. So is supply overtaking demand? Again, that is classic bubbly popply. What about NVIDIA? I mean, they're sort of the bellwether in this. If they started reporting several quarters of slowing data center revenue growth, that's a real sign. Because if this starts happening, then confidence evaporates ahead of it. And I think one of the big thing, and I think we're seeing some examples of this already, is that everybody, we're talking about enterprise customers here, have visibly piled into AI because they think that's what their investors want to see. And sometimes already it isn't delivering sufficient returns to justify the continuing spending. In layman's language, it ain't working properly. So one of the recent stories I love is Ford in the States recalling workers because AI wasn't delivering as they expected on quality. Now, I know a Ford car and quality are not two things you would probably put together as an idea, but apparently they care a lot about quality, and they've taken out all these massively experienced guys from their production lines looking after quality, replaced them with AI. Guess what? The AI wasn't as concerned about quality as the people. So, and there's another one I think, which is very financial, and it would be the credit markets tightening. Which would mean that it'd be more difficult to finance large infrastructure. Can't see any of that yet.
There you have it, right? That is the best we could do in terms of, are we having a bubble? You've got hyperscalers cutting AI, the cloud AI utilization dropping, NVIDIA, bless them, I don't want to see Jensen recording a bad quarter. I don't want to see that. And then enterprise customers not buying AI. There are examples of that, and the credit markets tightening. Yeah. So what's our key takeaway, do you think, from our discussion on bubbles?
The first thing is to understand that there's a key distinction between an AI technology bubble and an AI equity valuation bubble. So it's not about AI not being introduced to the economy and doing stuff. It is about what the markets think it's actually worth. And we know at this stage in the cycle, if you look at things in retrospect, you will think, wow, why did we overvalue this at the time? Because the technology itself, I think, will continue to see rapid adoption for years to come, because it's actually based upon generations of innovation in IT hardware, software, and usage. The infrastructure is there to absorb it. The reason to apply it is there in terms of efficiency, if for nothing else. But the problem is, in all of this, the share prices of some of the companies that are massively valued at the moment can experience multiple compressions of valuation, i.e., significant drops over time, if it's quite clear that the expectations of the financial markets get ahead of actual realized profits from application. Building a technology company is brutal. We know that. It's years of early mornings, late nights, working weekends, long hours, lost sleep and neglected loved ones. You keep going because of a relentless belief in what you're creating. At Hambleton Partners, our senior advisors have walked that path, experiencing at first hand the challenges that technology leaders face every day. We know selling your tech business isn't just a transaction, it's one of the most important life decisions you'll ever make. That's why we take a different approach to technology M&A. We combine deep transaction expertise with hard-won industry savvy, helping founders navigate every stage of the transaction process with empathy, insight, and the confidence born of deep experience. When the time is right to explore what's next, work with advisors who understand every step of the journey. Hambleton Partners. The problem that any great leader faces, and anybody who's been in a leadership position has to recognize this in themselves, is that the strategies that made you exceptional, certainly at the beginning of your tenure, become a form of institutional dogma. Of course they do, because you're the leader of the organization. The problem is the world is going to change around you, and faster, as we know. And what happens is you become less willing or even less able to adapt. You become risk averse. And ultimately, by the time you leave, because most people leave later than they should have done, many of the difficult decisions that you should have made have been postponed because you're still surfing the same wave, right? And what happens? Successor comes in, and what they inherit is not the great conditions that produce the success, i.e. the external conditions and the conditions that you made as a leader, but what can be regarded as just the accumulated consequences of years of deferred change, right? So what happens is the successor comes in and is then judged on the problems that they didn't create. And at the same time, nostalgia grows amongst the viewers of this for the leader whose later decisions contributed to the very problems that they're blaming the successor for. It's the organizational problem of what they often call in political circles the incumbency problem. Now, from our point of view, this happening is ruinous for continuous category domination. Successful leaders naturally gain confidence in the formula that brought them success. You just don't notice that everything is changing. So, but this isn't just the fault of the individual. It's the nature of organizations that those individuals become surrounded by people who are reluctant to challenge them. Now, that can be a career strategy from those individuals, or it can be a deliberate choice amongst the leader that they insulate themselves from what they see of as any threat. And if they do that, they can optimize all their strategies around protecting their past achievements rather than taking the risk of preparing for what is inevitably going to be future disruption, because they'll be long gone by the time the consequences of that become apparent. They'll just defer painful restructuring because it would tarnish, they think, an otherwise successful legacy. Oh, nothing went wrong, nothing was difficult when X was in charge. Weren't they great? All they're doing is deferring. And this is often fed badly by a particular worldview, which was good at the beginning of their tenure, but that will undoubtedly not fit a changing reality. So, the result is the organization actually appears to be healthy until external conditions shift. And then when they do, years and years and years of accumulated issues which have been brushed under the carpet emerge like a tsunami, and threaten to just roll straight over any successor, right? So you're there, you've accepted this big job you've probably been working your whole life for, you're succeeding the great god of any one particular company. You've got a big dilemma on your hands, right? So if you make radical changes, which are the things which probably need to do, you get the blame for disrupting the company. If you preserve the continuity, all you're doing is inheriting and exacerbating some declining performance in that company. Either way, comparisons with your predecessor are going to be unfavorable. You're basically screwed.
Let's rattle through a couple of tech examples. So let's go with the guys whose chips are in pretty much everything, and I don't mean NVIDIA. I'm talking about old school Intel.
Obvious to anybody who's been around the industry for a while is that Intel is one and still is one of the giants of the industry, and they dominated semiconductors for decades. And naturally, and sort of like the auto industry, they prospered, inverted commas, under leaders who quite understandably focused on protecting its integrated manufacturing model, even though it was quite clear that other companies were coming up, Arm being one of the greatest example of fabulous semi, who were being very, very successful. And what happened over the time that this model was being pursued is that manufacturing leadership slipped because of leadership, capex, changes in fab, and so on. Their competitors embraced outsourced fabrication, and AI accelerated demand for specialized chips. So NVIDIA almost came out of nowhere from inhabiting a tiny little niche for graphics into becoming the major bellwether of the industry.
Let's talk about their little journey then. So the big white hope, so to speak, was Pat Gelsinger. But he, of course, has now been replaced by Lip Bhutan. And he took over in mid-March, I think, 2025. Initially, so far, so good, right? The press sentiment's cautiously positive about the appointment, mixed on the near-time upside. So your boiled frog analogy seems to apply here, because Pat didn't make it second time round. The new sheriff's in town. Bank of America think it's good. The appointment is positive. Lip Boo has a solid track record. This is a clever decision.
Yeah, but by appointing somebody who is an absolute outsider, and American companies in tech in particular do have this habit of appointing insiders until the company is in such a bad shape that an outsider has to come in. And, that became absolutely clear to IBM in the 90s when they had to bring in a new chief executive whose entire career had been spent in food and tobacco. And it was he that turned the company around. Lou Gerstner was the executive from Nabisco and Philip Morris, and he didn't have this whole cultural inertia that gets built up over many years that causes these companies problems of their own making. So they genuinely can look at it dispassionately. And maybe the genius of Lip Bhutan coming in is that he doesn't have any of this cultural inertia, whereas Pat Gelsinger, who I personally have a great deal of respect for him because I've worked around him in the past, undoubtedly would have that culture inertia. So Lip Boo doesn't.
Well, I mean, mixed reactions. Bernstein analysts said Lip Bhutan feels more like an apology than a keynote. But it's clear there's a lot to do. Cantor Fitzgerald said about his appointment, he clearly has a lot of wood to chop, which brings us. That might be as good as a recovery CEO can hope for.
Was that wood to chop, that quote?
Wood to chop, yes.
How might we use that to segue into our next little example?
Well, the apples don't grow on trees. Yes, they do. Let's talk about, we got you there anyway. Steve Jobs.
We don't like to talk too much about Steve Jobs.
Everyone bangs on about him. Let's talk about Tim Cook.
So, we know Steve Jobs, the god of tech, died young, therefore always has a good rep. But he did leave the company after rescuing it, because it had nearly been out of business once before, with an extraordinary momentum. Tim, less the inspirational engineer, more the measured accountant, has worked the numbers in Apple and has overseen exceptional financial success. I mean, they were the world's first $1 trillion company, right? But there's a cost to that. I think they're still way too dependent on the iPhone. How can you keep any form of meaningful innovation, how can you keep the numbers coming in when the good old EU is mandating that people will actually be able to replace the batteries on their phones? So you've got that iPhone, obviously, it's still their major product. There just hasn't been any sustained pace of breakthrough in any product categories, and I'd include iPhone in that.
Yeah, I guess you got AirPods, but that's just an evolution and just highly priced version of the services, maybe with the App Store. But again, that's almost like not even a defensive moat. It's more like a rentier, sort of a toll on innovation.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I find very disappointing at Apple at the moment is what is their position even on generative AI, let alone anything else. And as I said before, they are going to be under increasing regulatory pressure because nobody really likes their model because it is monopolistic. Now, none of this should diminish Tim Cook's achievements, but what it does illustrate is how even highly successful, long-serving leaders eventually face a challenge of adapting an organization built around yesterday's strengths, right? So there's a guy called John Turnus, who was announced that he's going to be Cook's successor. Now, he's got an absolutely unenviable job of restarting Apple's innovation and delivering the numbers. My argument would be is that Jobs and Cook, one after another, have made Turnus's job really, really difficult.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Turnus is he's a long-time Apple insider, so per your point about probably not the fresh look that they need, and that sort of supports this continuity thing you were talking about. And so the bet that Apple's board's clearly making, according to lots of observers, is that here's an internal operator who understands what these days is quite a complex product machine. Very complex supply chain, of course, moving a lot of manufacturing out of China into India, and hopefully has some idea on the roadmap and isn't just going to give us brand new MacBooks every year. The main concern, therefore, clearly strategic. He's going to be judged on whether he can do something, and we're all looking for a new platform. And the analyst quotes things like John has a huge task ahead of him, which is the pivot to AI. Clearly, no progress there yet. It's a tough one.
The danger is that Turnus focuses on what he knows, and he tries to squeeze more value out of the company by changing its systems. So we've had somebody who was an engineering and product focused genius, somebody who is a super effective, financially driven CEO. Next one is another insider who will be focusing on what he knows, which is the manufacturing systems. To me, none of that augurs well for Apple's future.
Of course, Mr. Jobs ain't coming back, which leads us on to the great success. A lot of people talk about the .com.bomb, but something that came out of it that really is a global force these days is Amazon.
Yeah, so we know that Jeff Bezos created one of history's most remarkable businesses from nothing. I mean, whatever you think of him, incredible vision, ruthless execution. But even Jeff decided he needed a break at some point. So when Andy Jassy became CEO, he inherited not a lot of good stuff. And maybe this is why Jeff decided to bail. So at the time Jassy came into the company, there was a whole load of post-pandemic overcapacity. There was slowing cloud growth, definite pressure from the market to improve profitability after years of, let's call it aggressive expansion, i.e. buying business. Not quite freemium, but that thing, loss leading. And they are in an environment of regulatory scrutiny of their business practices, and of course general environmental concerns about their business model. Now, in any defense of Jassy, many of those conditions are also all rooted in extraordinary, and that's the true sense of the word. The pandemic was an extraordinary event in the modern era. But the point is that doesn't matter. He's been handed the baton by Bezos, and investors will continue to judge him against Bezos, who's got this legendary reputation, and is picking up the mess that was created under Bezos.
Yeah, but back a few years ago, there was a buzz that Mr. Bezos is coming back to managing the everything store, and so far that hasn't happened. You get the feeling that somebody out there, the investors, want that to happen, but there's sort of three sentiments of these folks who in the Bezos back piece, which is nostalgic folks who probably work with him, want it back, the contrarian analysts who thinks re-entering in a crisis is the way forward, and those who've looked at Amazon and decided, as with most retailers, to be frank, that low profitability is forever, and that's what retailers do. I think one employee wrote, he should come back, it's the best. Another one said, miss me yet. But, is this going to happen? I don't think so. I think he's quite happy sending rockets up into space. And I think, good or bad, maybe Jassy is the guy. If he's forged, it doesn't sound like he's forged his own route yet. But bottom line, I think I don't see it myself. Bezos back.
I totally agree with you. And, let's hope that Jassy can pull this off and be seen as the executive that didn't get the poisoned chalice from the previous CEO, and he can move things forward. But he's just another example of the danger of picking up the baton from a legendary founder.
Moving on then, finally, to our the odd one out. We could say the one that nobody is examining yet, because despite being literally, and this just is like the schoolboy thing, being called out, challenged to martial arts training with bad guy troll Ramzan Kadyrov. I would advise you to look at the memes on X. It's really quite funny in a macho sort of way. Elon is still, despite all of this nonsense, puerile idiocy, he's still only 55. And it might seem odd. It seems odd to me that the question of his succession never comes up. Does that seem odd to you?
Not at the moment. He is absolutely extraordinary, and I'm sure the question of succession will never occur in the mind of the Musk. He's a very strangely wired guy, so normal things like succession probably don't even occur to him.
Yeah, so you would put him therefore in one of the ranks of exceptionalism that talks about generational tech leaders. The likes of Jobs. Certainly Elon would be there. And sad to say, I hate to say it, but maybe Zuckerberg exemplifies these once in a generation type leaders.
They're once in a generation leaders who are leading in a very particular world with very particular toys to play with. And previously those types of leaders would really have only emerged as conquerors and creators of empire.
So it's clearly tricky to talk about succession, and there are TV series better than this that have been written about succession. People like to remember the confidence of the earlier years, the economic growth. Everybody likes to win. Classic saying, success has many fathers and failures and orphans. So the economic growth is important. The technological breakthroughs we all live with. But what is tricky is the succession, and it's less likely that we're going to associate the problems that new leaders get with those that were sowed, as you said, when the frog was being boiled earlier in the case. I guess the common thread is that long-serving leaders inevitably over time become ineffective.
Yeah, they don't. Everything has a natural decline. I think, everything goes through an S-curve, even human beings. And the thing is knowing when to step off onto the next curve, and it's just so difficult to quit while you're ahead. It's very difficult to make the argument, but the problem is that if you stay around for too long, the institution that you're leading starts to optimize around you instead of the changing external realities and category shifts that are going on. So like it or not, you do become the blocker, and it's only you that can decide to take yourself out of it. And what you don't want to do is create a situation when, by the time a successor arrives for you, when you've eventually decided you want to move on, they inherit a system that was your fault, that requires very difficult and often very unpopular reforms, because that's not fair. That is not a fair thing to do to your successor. And even if they do start to drive those reforms, then what will happen is that there could be a depression of short-term performance. And what does that do? Well, it makes the successor appear less capable than the predecessor. Again, that is not fair.
And we were trying in this segment to avoid as much as possible any political commentary, but I think what you laid out there is pretty much what's happening with Mr. Burnham and what he's facing. I guess we're going to wish Mr. Jassy, Mr. Turnus and Lip Bhutan all the very best. That's all we can do. The rest is up to them.
The best time for a successful leader to step aside is before their strategic assumptions become institutional orthodoxy.
Thank you for listening. If you want to learn more about category design, head to becategorical.com. If you need help designing and dominating your category, then get in touch. Contact details are in the show notes.